What's going on, everyone? Hey, welcome to Real Life. I'm so glad that you are here. Welcome to week 4 of this message series called The Good Life. And over the last couple weeks, we've acknowledged that every single one of us, in one way, shape, or form, is trying to build our version of the good life. We all have a dream of the preferred future, and honestly, a conviction that says if we were in charge and got to make all the decisions and had all the money, we would build a really good life. Now, all the details of our individual dreams are different, but what's amazing is that in 2025, AI can help you imagine any possible outcome. And so I was thinking a little bit about my dreams and what I think would be cool in the future. And I've always thought it would be cool to be the kind of guy that drove around a vintage sports car. So I asked AI what I would look like. And apparently this is what I would look like driving a Mustang. I'm a little concerned that my forehead is above the windshield. All right, that seems like a recipe for disaster, but apparently that's the way it would be. Then I thought, what if in a different life I had pursued a career in politics and I had become the president of the United States? What would it look like? You'd vote for that guy, right? Like he totally agrees with all of your opinions and he would never let you down. And then I thought, you know what? I don't want to be the president. I want to win the Masters, all right? I want to be so good at golf that I would win its greatest tournament. Now, if you're a graphic designer here, you do not need to worry about your job security because there is a golf club growing out of my right hand for some reason. I don't know why. But every single one of us has some kind of version of the dream and that we're trying to create. And what we've been looking at over the last few weeks is this list that Jesus gives us in Matthew chapter 5. It's right at the beginning of one of his most famous messages he ever gives. And it's a list called the beatitudes. And it's where he describes a life well lived, the kind of people that God blesses, the people that will really be happy in this life. But when you compare and contrast our list to Jesus' list, you're going to find some stark differences. In fact, when you read Jesus' list, it's almost like the attributes that he gives us are the very things we're trying to avoid at all costs. He said God blesses those people that are spiritually in need. And we think, well, I don't want to be a needy person. He says God blesses those who are mourning their loss and are sad. And we're like, I don't want to be in that situation. He says God blesses those who don't make themselves the center of the universe at all times. And we think, well, if I don't think about me, then who's going to? And he makes this list, and we're going to add one more of it today. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 7, he said, God blesses those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Now, in every world religion that you'll ever find, you will find either advocacy for or a mandate to care for the poor. It'd be hard to find any faith system that doesn't encourage its followers to care for the less fortunate. But today we're going to see that Jesus' version is unique. And as is often the case, it's more invasive, it's more sacrificial, and it's more impactful than any other version that you'll find. Now, can we be honest with one another here today? We're called Real Life Church. We always want to be real and authentic. I'll admit something if you join me in admitting that it's true about you as well. You ready? There are some kinds of people that get on our nerves. There are some people that do some things that make us feel some kind of way. Like, for instance, there are people who will talk on speakerphone in public places. Can you imagine? I too hope that your Aunt Kathy's foot fungus clears up. I just don't want to hear about it while I'm eating, all right? I don't want to do that. There are people that will take 2 parking spots for a single car. Unbelievable. Even though it's not illegal, we're judging you. I want you to know that. We are every time. And then, maybe the worst of them all, there are people that do not return their shopping cart to the corral in the parking lot. I hope that there was an emergency procedure and you are the heart surgeon at Gray Sloan Memorial Hospital because that is the only acceptable excuse to leave a cart unattended. There are some people that act some kind of way that make us feel some way. Now, those are the ones that are easy to talk about. Those are the ones that are fun to make fun of. But what we're going to discover today through the teaching of Jesus is that just below the surface in every single one of our lives, there's a kind of person, there's a group of people that it's really hard to like. And we've never even tried to love. And if we ever had the opportunity to serve or sacrifice for this kind of person, we're not sure that we would. If you have a Bible or a Bible app, we're going to be hanging out in Luke chapter 10. And so you can head in that direction. And the reason we encourage you to bring something every week is so that you can engage with what you're hearing, and it'll help it sink in a little bit more. So we'd love for you to bring a Bible or a Bible app, but if you don't have either of those, they'll be on the screens next to us, and you can read along. But what we're going to see in Luke 10 is one of Jesus' most famous parables. A parable is a story that illustrates an eternal truth. And the reason Jesus taught stories so often is because he knew us. And he knew that if he just gave us a list of truths that we needed to accept and obey, we probably wouldn't. In fact, God did one time. It was called the 10 Commandments. Didn't go great. And so Jesus shows up and he teaches these stories to engage our imagination and help us consider things that we never would have otherwise considered. And today you're going to hear maybe one that you've heard before. Maybe you have experience, and this one is going to sound familiar. But I want to warn you that the danger with familiarity is that it can lose its power. Like you may hear something that you've heard before and say, oh, I've got this one. I've heard this one before. I don't really need this one today. And what we're about to hear is Jesus teach us something that is powerful enough to reveal a part of our soul that, quite frankly, we were hoping to hide. He's going to show us just how far we have to go, but he's going to lovingly provide us a path to get there. So let's jump in. Luke chapter 10, verse 25. Here's the setup. It says, one day, an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question, Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus replied, well, what does the law of Moses say? How do you read it? The man answered, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Right? Jesus told him, do this and you will live. But the man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Here's what's going on. One day Jesus is teaching, and this guy shows up, and he is an expert in religious law. That means he's read all the scriptures, he's memorized most of them, he knows the technical answer to all the spiritual questions, and he stands up as Jesus is teaching, and he asks him the question with the intention of trapping him. This happened all the time during Jesus' ministries, that someone would show up believing that they were on an intellectual and spiritual plane that was equal to Jesus's. And they would ask a question hoping to get him in a theological trap. Now, the reason the religious leaders of the day were suspicious of Jesus is because they didn't think that he cared about God's law. He didn't care about the religious rules. He didn't seem to value holiness like all the other religious people. And here's how they came to that conclusion. Jesus would keep the company of a bunch of rough around the edges people. He would go to social gatherings with people that stole money and sold their bodies and most certainly did not observe religious rituals. And so they came to the conclusion that if he can be friends with people that don't obey the rules, he must not care about the rules. If he's cool spending time with unholy people, he's probably unholy himself. And so the question went, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? Notice the assumption was this guy could do something, be good enough to earn his way in. Now, Jesus didn't take the bait. He answered the question with the question. He said, well, what do you read? What do you understand the law to be? And here was his answer. He said, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. This right here was a common way of summarizing the over 700 religious rules that you'll find in the Torah. Love God with everything that you have, love God perfectly, and be equally as invested in the thriving of other people as you are invested in your own thriving. And Jesus is like, yeah, nailed it, totally. If you can love God perfectly and love everybody else perfectly, heaven is all yours. And you can feel the religious experts start scrambling a little bit, like, hold on, did I just get trapped by the guy I was trying to trap? Why did he agree with me so fast? And then you can feel him doing the moral math of like, oh man, like I love God with a lot of my heart, but my heart desires the approval of my peers. And I love God with most of my soul, but also my identity is pretty wrapped up in my job performance. I love God with most of my mind, but I think about myself a lot. Maybe I'm further away from being a good person than I thought. And in a moment of conviction, he did the exact same thing that you and I have done over and over and over again. He tried to shrink the expectations. Do you notice what he said? The man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, like technically speaking, like you can't possibly mean everybody, like who technically is my neighbor? In order to make himself feel like a good person, he attempts to negotiate the mandate. He's lessening the call to action. He's trying to find the floor of acceptable obedience. In my house, we have 4 kids, and my kids try to pull this with me all the time. They are constantly looking for the lowest amount of obedience that will be accepted by their parents. And so at dinner table, they'll look at their plate and they say, Dad, out of these 12 green beans, how many do I have to eat? 12. All right, 12 is what the answer is. Out of this basket of clean clothes, how many do I have to fold? All of them. They are yours. In your house, you have a sign in your kitchen that says, live, laugh, love. In our house, we have a sign that says, we don't negotiate with terrorists. All right, that's what we do in our family. We're built different. So this guy here, he's looking at Jesus and he's saying, all right, hold on. You got to be a little more specific here. If you want me to be as invested in the thriving of my neighbor as I am in my own personal thriving, let's be specific. Like, who's my neighbor? Really, the question that he was asking is, who do I have to love? He was doing what so many of us have done at one point or another, if we're followers of Jesus, is we're looking for the minimum level of obedience that will make God let us in. What's the least amount of love I can show and still be considered a good person? Because there's no way that Jesus actually wants us to treat everyone that we come across with the same amount of love. And it was to that question that Jesus told this story in verse 30. He said, a Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. The next day, he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man, and if his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here. Now, which of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, the one who showed him mercy. Then Jesus said, yes, now go and do the same. Sometimes when we're reading the Bible, and especially when it comes to the parables that Jesus told, one of our temptations is to treat them like one of those fables that you were told as a kid, One of those stories that has a nice moral at the end of it, like the tortoise and the hare, where a turtle and a bunny taught you the value of persistence, or the boy who cried wolf that said, if you play fast and loose with the truth, and when you're in a time of need, no one will take you seriously. But friends, may I implore you, please do not insult the greatest storyteller of all time by treating his teaching as an episode of Sesame Street. That's not what he's doing. The story that he just told is so layered and so complex and reveals so much about our heart. It requires our full consideration. In our house right now, Trudy and I, we're watching some of our favorite movies with our teenagers that live with us. And it's a very precarious position to put yourself in as a parent, because all of your favorite movies have that one scene that you forgot about. The one where they're going to see something you didn't want them to see, or hear something you didn't want them to hear, so you got to panic and fast forward real fast. But earlier this week, we were watching the movie Ocean's 11. Now, one of my favorites. It's got George Clooney and Brad Pitt, and they put together this heist in Las Vegas. And it was about halfway through the movie where I realized, I think we're rooting for bad people. Why am I so invested in these guys robbing millions of dollars that are not there? Are we leading our children to a life of crime through this movie? Why are we rooting for the bad guy? And to Jesus' original audience there, as Jewish listeners, they would have had a very similar moment as they heard Jesus tell this story, because they were like, hold on, a Samaritan is the hero? Back in the day, there were these two people groups, Jewish people and Samaritans, and they were heated rivals. They hated each other. The Samaritans were an ethnic group that was the result of Jewish people intermarrying and reproducing with non-Jewish people. It was a mixed race. And they looked at each other and disagreed with one another about everything. They thought the other people were wrong religiously, culturally, philosophically, politically, and in their family. They would honestly say that all the problems in the world are that other group's fault. Quite frankly, the world would be better without those people. So the idea of a Samaritan being the hero of Jesus' story would have thrown them off considerably. What Jesus just did in this story, whether you noticed it or not, is he puts all of us in the uncomfortable position of acknowledging that when you and I see someone that needs help, it triggers a checklist in our heads and in our hearts, intentionally or unintentionally, to determine whether that person deserves our help. The first box that we check off in this checklist is we ask who. We're like, what kind of person is this? I mean, I'm totally willing to help people that I'm related to. I'm willing to help my friends. I'm even the kind of person that will help you move. I'm that good of a person. But Jesus, are you talking about people of other ethnicities? You want me to help an immigrant that crossed the border illegally? You want me to have compassion for the ultra wealthy that have more than me? You want me to offer assistance to the poor that won't get a job? You want me to be loving to red hat wearing conservatives? You want me to be compassionate toward police protesting liberals? You want me to personally sacrifice for groups with opposing views on sexuality and gender? So many of the applications for our mercy necessitate that you look like me and think like me, act like me, believe in me, and then I'm willing to help. And Jesus comes and he blows the lid off that box. After we figure out who needs help, usually our second question is, when? In what kind of circumstances am I willing to help? Did something happen to them and it wasn't really their fault and they were victims? Then I'm totally willing to help. But what if their current circumstance is a result of their own decisions, the bad ones, and they deserve to be where they're at? Do I have to help them too? So when I hear a story of a kid that was born in a slum in Africa, it's not his fault. That was circumstantial. I'm totally willing to send $40 a month. But when I see someone on the street corner here that their addiction prevented them from keeping a job, I'm kind of wondering, do they deserve my help? When someone gets in a car accident and it wasn't their fault and they can't work for a few months, man, I'm totally fine showing them some mercy. I'll buy them a DoorDash gift card so that they can eat tonight, no problem. But if that same person has multiple children with multiple partners to whom they are not married to any of them and now are in financial hardship because of it, isn't that kind of the result of their decisions? We're going through this mental application as to who deserves our help. The third question that we usually end up asking is like, yeah, okay, but like how much? How much should I give? How much should I help? I mean, if I was doing better for myself, I'd probably be more generous, but right now I can't afford to give them what they need because I need those resources for myself. I first have to take care of me. Remember those first two guys that walked past the man in need in Jesus' story? He calls him a priest and a temple assistant. They saw the same man in the same condition and made the decision to cross the road and pass on by. Why would they do that? Well, remember, Jesus is the greatest storyteller of all time, and he set the setting of this story on a very familiar road, the one from Jerusalem to Jericho. This road had earned a nickname because of its notoriety. People called it the Bloody Pass. So many people had been jumped and robbed and beaten and killed. It had a terrible nickname. And so when the priest and that temple assistant walked by, they were doing the self-protection math. They're saying if the bandits just beat up that guy, they could still be waiting for me. It would be foolish for me to stop unless I face the same fate. They had to take care of themselves first. They couldn't lighten this man's burden without burdening themselves. And here comes this Samaritan. And it's like he doesn't have a checklist at all. Because if he had asked who about the man that was lying on the road, the answer would have been someone that disagrees with you about everything. Someone that hates you and your people group and your family. Someone that almost certainly would not have returned the favor if the roles were reversed. If they had asked when, he easily could have said, dude, you knew this road was dangerous. Everybody knows that. You should have come with protection. You set yourself up, and quite frankly, you've been living a life of hatred and racism toward my people your entire life. Maybe you deserved what was coming to you. And if he had asked the question, how much? There's no way he would have reasonably come to the conclusion that giving 2 weeks' worth of his wages to take care of a stranger was the smart thing to do. I mean, it was absurd generosity. It's ludicrous mercy. And Jesus says, God blesses those who are merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Now, before we get to some practical steps that you and I can take in the direction of mercy this week, we first have to recognize how this can grow in our hearts in the first place. People for thousands of years had said, you know what, we should all be kind. And we should all be merciful, and we should all be generous, and it's all been made from a moral argument that it's good to help people in need. If you're an enlightened person, you have to help others. If you're a progressive person, you have to care for the disenfranchised. If you're a religious person, you got to do it because the book said so. But all of those arguments just lead to this duty-bound obligation that never changes our hearts. Remember that priest and the temple assistant? Their job was literally to receive donations and distribute it to the poor. That was their 9-to-5 daily job. But when it came to a moment where they had to get in the game, to where they would have to be vulnerable for the sake of someone else, they wouldn't do it. Morality and being a good person is only going to lead to a weight of guilt that will weigh you down the rest of your life. If right now you're thinking, man, I should really be more merciful, I should really be more generous, I'm not any good at this, and you're feeling guilty, stop. It's not going to do any good. It's going to require a heart change. Again, one more time, I can't emphasize this enough. Jesus is the single greatest storyteller of all time because he puts his audience, you and me, in the story. Now, if you've ever heard this one before, Or maybe this was the very first time you heard this parable Jesus taught. Almost all of us ask ourselves the question, which of the three would I have been? Would I have been the two that walked by the man in need? Would I have preserved myself? Would I have avoided danger? Or would I have been like that really good Samaritan? Would I have been the hero? Would I have been generous? Would I have made myself vulnerable? But here's the thing. You and I, we're not any of the three. That's not the point of the story. You and I, Jesus puts us on the road. He says, what if you had been beaten? What if you were dying? What if your only hope was a free act of grace? What if the only way you'd survive was an act of mercy from your greatest enemy? Would you want it? Friends, the only way we'll ever extend grace to others is to receive it ourselves. The only way for us to become generous people is to recognize that we didn't earn any of this in the first place. The only way to love people that wouldn't love us back is to realize that Jesus did the exact thing for you and me. Romans 5 says, "For since our friendship with God was restored by the death of his Son," check this out, "while we were still his enemies, we will certainly be saved through the life of his Son." The only way for us to grow in mercy is to recognize that we are recipients of mercy. Now, I do want to give you 3 practical steps we can take in the direction of mercy this week to see it grow in our heart. And the first one is this: be interruptible. Right? Be interruptible. When Jesus was telling that story, he didn't say the reason the Samaritan was willing to help is because honestly he didn't really have that much going on. It doesn't say that his calendar was super clear and that's why he was able to get involved. No, he said he was on his way to somewhere. There were people waiting for him when he got there. He was still willing to interrupt his plans to care for someone else. And it's possible that you've been listening to all this and being like, you know what? In my daily life, I'm not really sure I pass a lot of need. I live in Santa Clarita, so do all my coworkers and neighbors. We've kind of figured this thing out. I'm not sure I need to show much mercy. Friends, I just want to ask, is it possible that it's not an absence of need in your life, you're just too busy to see it? Our calendars get full, our minds get busy with a lot of noise, and we may be blowing past opportunities for mercy that God is introducing into our life because we're moving so quickly. Today, your prayer may be something like this: God, help me have eyes to see people like you do. Let me slow down long enough to simply notice. Here's the second thing we can do: respond to the need, not the label. That checklist that all of us run through to determine whether someone deserves our help, it eliminates most of the people in our lives. And I just have to wonder if our checklist is so tight so that we won't have to get in the game. Jesus laid down his life for us while we were actively his enemies. Mercy is not a deserved assistance. It's our opportunity to love. And here's the third thing you can do this week: embrace action, not just emotion. You see, we live in a culture that is highly emotional and highly temporary in our response to injustice and pain. And as your friend, let me tell you, there is a difference between a social media post of support and personal financial sacrifice. There is a difference between public proclamations of caring for the vulnerable and becoming vulnerable ourselves. If God is moving you to help someone in your life, it's time to get in the game. Again, remember that the motivation isn't just to be a good person, isn't to try hard to be compassionate. It's to remember what Jesus did for us first. On a regular basis, we slow down to remember that very thing, and there's this symbol that helps us do it. It's a symbol called communion. And there's bread and juice that represents Jesus' body and blood. And it draws us to the greatest act of mercy this world has ever seen. If there was ever anyone that didn't deserve God's help, it was you and me, and he still gave it freely. If you didn't grab the communion elements on the way in, all you need to do is raise your hand. One of our hosts would love to get you what you need. And if you're new to all this, still got a lot of questions, you're not even sure where you stand, man, we're so glad you're here. And you shouldn't ever feel pressure to pretend or want to participate. You can sit back and simply reflect on what you've heard today. But I also have this feeling that it's things like this, teachings like Jesus, that grab your attention of your head and your heart and say, man, what if life really could live that way? Maybe that would be better than living for myself and making myself the center of the universe. What would it look like to follow Jesus? We pray for you every single week that this would be the day that you would begin a journey with him that you'll never regret. But for those of us that are followers of Jesus, this is our opportunity to remember what he has done for us. You can take communion in your own time.